At 8:17 on a Monday morning, Daniel stared at the number. On his laptop screen, $18.47, that was what was left in his checking account after rent, groceries, his phone bill, and the minimum payment on a credit card he had promised himself he would stop using. His job wasn't terrible, that was almost the problem. He worked full-time, he showed up, he answered emails, finished assignments, stayed late when somebody asked, and got the occasional small raise, but every year looked almost exactly like the one before. He wasn't broke because he refused to work, he was broke because his work had a ceiling and he didn't know where the ceiling was until he hit it for a long time. Daniel thought earning $100,000 was something that happened to other people, doctors, lawyers, software engineers, executives, people with expensive degrees and perfect resumes. Then he noticed something uncomfortable. A lot of people who eventually reached six figures didn't begin with six-figure skills. They began by making a few career decisions differently, not overnight, not with a secret side hustle, not by working themselves into the ground. They changed what they were paid for. That distinction sounds small. It isn't, because the distance between $40,000 and $100,000 usually isn't created by working 2.5 times harder. It's created by moving into work where the value of your decisions, skills, responsibility, and results can command more money. Daniel's first move was not asking for a raise, it was asking a more uncomfortable question. What exactly was his employer paying him for? The answer was simple: reliability. He was dependable, he completed routine tasks. He knew the company's systems, he rarely caused problems. Those things mattered, but they weren't rare, and in the labor market, skills that are common are usually easier to replace than skills that are scarce. That doesn't mean common jobs are worthless. It means that if you want your income to change dramatically, you eventually have to become difficult to replace or move into a role where your decisions have a larger financial impact. Daniel started looking around his own company. He noticed that the people earning more weren't necessarily working longer hours. Some were solving harder problems, some were managing people, some were selling, some were dealing directly with important customers. Some understood technical systems that very few employees understood, and some had simply moved into departments where the market paid more. That last one bothered him because it meant his career wasn't only about becoming better, it was also about becoming better in the right direction. He had spent 3 years becoming excellent at tasks that weren't connected to the kind of income he wanted, so he stopped asking, "How do I become better at my job?" He started asking, "Which problems are expensive enough for companies to pay someone well to solve them?" That question changed the way he looked at work. A company doesn't pay you based only on how tired you are at the end of the day. It pays because you create, protect, manage, sell, save, or control something valuable. Sometimes that value is obvious. A salesperson brings in revenue, an engineer builds systems, a manager coordinates a team, a financial professional helps control risk, a skilled technician keeps expensive equipment running, a project manager prevents costly mistakes, a marketer brings customers through the door. The job titles change, the principle doesn't. If you want your income to rise, pay attention to the value attached to the problems you can solve. Daniel didn't quit, that was important. He kept his job while building the next version of himself. Every evening, he spent a small amount of time learning a skill that connected to a higher value role inside his industry. Not 5 hours, not some impossible schedule, just enough to keep moving. He learned how the company's reporting worked. Then he learned how to automate parts of it. Then he volunteered for projects that other employees avoided because they were complicated. The work wasn't glamorous, but something changed. People started coming to him with problems, and that is one of the quiet signals that a career is changing. You stop being the person who waits for instructions. You become the person people call when something needs to be figured out. That doesn't guarantee a six-figure salary, but it changes your position, and position matters. There are two people who both work hard. One is paid $45,000, the other is paid $90,000. It is tempting to conclude that the second person simply works twice as hard. Usually, the story is more complicated. They may operate in different industries, they may carry different levels of responsibility, they may have different technical skills, they may influence revenue, they may manage larger budgets, they may negotiate contracts. They may own decisions with expensive consequences, or they may have. Learn how to communicate their value better, that last part is. Often underestimated, a career can stall because someone is good at doing the work but terrible at showing what the work accomplished. Daniel learned to keep track of results, not just tasks results. He didn't write, prepared weekly reports. He recorded what those reports helped the team understand. He didn't write, helped with the process. He documented the time the new process saved. He didn't say, worked with customers. He kept track of problems solved, accounts supported, and improvements made. His resume slowly changed from a list of responsibilities into evidence. That distinction mattered when he finally started interviewing. His first interview didn't go well. He expected questions about whether he could perform the job. Instead, the interviewer kept asking one thing in different ways: what did you change? Daniel didn't have a good answer. He had done plenty, but he hadn't thought in terms of impact, so he went back to work for the next few months. He deliberately looked for measurable improvements. He took on a messy internal project. He helped remove repetitive work from a process. He learned enough about a software tool to become the person coworkers asked for help. He also started talking to people already doing the jobs he wanted. That gave him another uncomfortable lesson: career advice online often makes advancement sound like a straight staircase. It isn't. Real careers look more like a map. You move sideways. You take a role that teaches you something. You leave an industry. You return. You take a smaller title for a better skill. You change companies. You discover that the job you thought you wanted isn't actually right for you. Then you adjust. The goal isn't to make every move upward. On paper, the goal is to make moves that increase your future options. Daniel eventually received an offer. $63,000. It wasn't $100,000. And it wasn't supposed to be. The new job gave him something more important than a bigger paycheck. It gave him access to harder problems. He was closer to customers. He had more responsibility. He worked with systems he didn't understand, yet he was uncomfortable again. That discomfort was useful because the first major jump in income often comes from learning to operate at the next level before you feel completely ready. There is a trap here. Some people wait until they feel qualified, then they apply. Then they discover that everyone else is waiting too. Career growth often works in the opposite direction. You learn enough to take the opportunity seriously. You apply. You get rejected. You find the gap. You close the gap. You apply again. You become qualified partly through the process of trying. But there was another problem waiting. For Daniel, he had increased his salary. His lifestyle immediately started increasing to a nicer apartment, more restaurants, a better phone, weekend spending that felt harmless because his paycheck was bigger. For a few months, he felt richer. Then he looked at his bank account. He wasn't. His income had changed. His financial position hadn't changed nearly as much. This is where the journey from $0 to $100,000 becomes more interesting, because earning more money and becoming financially stronger are two different things. A higher income creates possibilities. It doesn't automatically create wealth. Daniel decided that every raise would have a job before he received it. Some would improve his emergency cushion, some would increase long-term savings, some would pay down expensive debt, some could be used for education or tools that improved his earning ability, and some could simply make life better. The point wasn't to live miserably, it was to stop every raise from disappearing into a more expensive version of the same life. Then came the second career decision that changed everything. He stopped thinking only about his current salary. He started thinking about his market value. Those are not always the same thing. Your current employer may value you at one number. Another company may value the same experience differently. An employee can be underpaid without being bad at their job. They can also be well paid without being exceptional at every part of it. That is why periodically testing the market can be useful, not because you have to leave, because you need information. Daniel interviewed again. This time, he wasn't desperate. He had a job, he had experience, he had measurable results, and he had learned how the market talked about his skills. The offer came back at $78,000. That was the moment he realized something. His income hadn't jumped because he had suddenly become twice as talented. It had jumped because he had moved into a different part of the market. This is one of the most powerful career moves people overlook. Sometimes the fastest way to increase your income is not becoming better at the exact job you already have, it's transferring your existing skills into a higher paying environment. The same communication skills can exist in low paying and high paying industries. The same analytical ability can exist in small and large companies. The same project management experience can be worth very different amounts depending on the complexity of the projects. The same technical knowledge can have different market values depending on how scarce it is. Your skill is one side of the equation. The market is the other. Daniel kept moving, but now he had a new problem. He was becoming good at many things: good at reporting, good at systems, good with customers, good at communication, good at solving problems. That sounds useful. It can also become confusing at some point. A career needs a recognizable identity, not necessarily a narrow one, a clear one. Daniel began combining his skills instead of collecting random ones. He became the person who understood the technical side of a process and could explain it clearly to customers and managers. That combination was much rarer, and rarity creates leverage. This is where many careers accelerate, not when someone becomes world-class at one isolated skill. Sometimes it happens when someone becomes unusually strong at the intersection of several valuable skills: communication plus technology, sales plus industry knowledge, finance plus data design plus business operations plus automation, management plus technical expertise. The combinations are endless. The important part is that the combination solves a problem companies care about. Daniel's next promotion came with more responsibility. $91,000. He was close, but psychologically, $100,000 felt enormous. It had become a finish line that was dangerous because salary milestones can make people think the journey is about crossing a number. It isn't. The real transformation had already happened. At $18.47 in his bank account, Daniel thought his problem was money. At $91,000, he understood that his real problem had been career direction. The number was just the scoreboard. He still had choices to make. Would he specialize further, move into management, become a technical expert, change industries again, build a business? There wasn't one correct answer, and that may be the most important part of the entire story. There is no universal career ladder. A person can reach $100,000 through technology, another can do it through sales, another through healthcare, another through skilled trades, another through finance, another through operations, another through a small business. The route depends on the person's abilities, interests, location, industry, experience, and the opportunities available to them. The mistake is believing there is one secret path. There isn't. There are patterns, and one of the strongest is simple: increase the value of the problems you can solve. Daniel's final jump happened differently than the others. His company was expanding. A difficult project appeared. Nobody wanted to own it. The deadlines were aggressive. Several teams were involved. Customers were frustrated. Daniel volunteered, not because he was sure he could do it, because he knew it would force him to operate at a higher level. For months, the project consumed his attention. He made mistakes. He had difficult conversations. He learned to delegate. He learned to negotiate priorities. He learned that being technically correct isn't enough when other people have to execute the plan. And when the project finally worked, the company had a very different view of him. The next offer was just over $100,000. There was no dramatic music, no giant celebration. He closed his laptop, looked at the number, and remembered that Monday morning, $18.47. The interesting part wasn't that he had gone from almost nothing to six figures. It was everything that happened between those two numbers. He stopped confusing effort with value. He learned skills connected to expensive problems. He built evidence instead of collecting job duties. He moved toward responsibility. He tested the market. He changed environments when the environment limited his growth. He combined skills instead of endlessly collecting them, and he learned not to let every increase in income become an increase in spending. None of those moves was magic, none guaranteed success. Some failed, some took longer than expected, and plenty of people following similar paths will take a completely different route. But there is a useful way to look at your own career. Forget the number for a moment. Look at the problems you solve. Who needs those problems solved? How difficult are they? How expensive is failure? How rare are the skills required? How much responsibility can you handle? Can you communicate the value of your work? And perhaps most importantly, are you becoming more valuable in a market that actually rewards it? Because there is a strange thing about careers: you can spend years climbing a ladder and only later realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. The person earning $40,000 isn't necessarily less capable than the person earning $100,000. The person earning $100,000 isn't necessarily smarter. Income is not a perfect measurement of human worth. It is a measurement of what a particular market is willing to pay for a particular combination of skills, responsibility, scarcity, and results. That means your career can change not because you become a different person overnight, because you make different decisions repeatedly: one skill, one project, one conversation, one application, one uncomfortable move, then another and another, until, eventually, the number on the paycheck looks completely different. The biggest career jump may not begin with a promotion. It may begin with a question: not, how can I work harder? But, what would I need to become capable of solving? Daniel's story didn't end at $100,000. That was the point. The number wasn't the destination, it was proof that his career had stopped being something that simply happened to him. He had started directing it, and for anyone starting from $0, that may be the most valuable move of all.